Welcome, welcome. Please find a seat and make yourselves comfortable. Welcome, and thank you for taking the time to come this evening to our memorial lecture, remembering Geofffrey Bawa, of course, who was 99 on the 23rd. My name is Suhanya Rafal. I'm a trustee of the Lunaganga Trust, and it is always a pleasure to present this lecture to a community of avid architectural fans, believers. I'd like to begin by just making some acknowledgments before making my introduction. The first, of course, is to thank Miles Young, who has supported this lecture by sponsoring our guest speaker for over 10 years now. So thank you, Miles. We need supporters like Miles to make these things work. I also need to thank our sponsors, media sponsors in especially Vijay Newspapers Private Limited, Sunday Times and the Daily Mirror, because without them we can't communicate with our audiences. So thank you to those sponsors. I want to also thank the Sri Lanka Foundation for the auditorium support this evening. I'd also like to thank Murad Ismail, who has made it possible to invite Professor El-Wakil this evening, and to Anjalendran especially, who has been a true believer in so much of the work we do in the Trust, and we value and appreciate his support. The Geofffrey Bawa Memorial Lecture, of course, has been going on since his passing, and one of the key aspects of the lecture is to celebrate Geoffrey's work by recognizing and celebrating the work of other architects. A very important part of our role is to understand the global world in which we live and to think and talk about the work of eminent individuals and their practices. So it is indeed a pleasure to introduce our Professor Abdel El-Wakil, who is an Egyptian architect who graduated from the Ain Shams University in Cairo, where from 1965 to 1970, he lectured in the Department of Architecture. He is a recipient of 2 Aga Khan Awards for Architecture in 1980 and in 1989, as well as the prestigious Richard H. Driehaus Prize for his contributions to classical architecture. This was received in 2009. In 1999, Professor El-Wakil was honored in Riyadh at the International Congress of Mosque Architecture with the first prize for design of contemporary mosque architecture. Later, he has served as a member of the jury and think tank for the Aga Khan Prize itself. Over the past 5 decades, he has designed significant buildings across Saudi Arabia and other Middle Eastern countries, constituting of public buildings, private residencies, places of worship, and considered by most to be a foremost contemporary authority in Islamic architecture. The Prince of Wales selected him amongst his advisors for the Prince of Wales School of Architecture and as patron to the Oxford Centre of Islamic Studies. In Qatar, he is undertaking the master planning for that city quarter. He has been involved in design development of compressed earth brickmaking in South Africa, and he retains his aim of one day, in homage to Fathi, to make a sustainable village retaining the culture and forms of tradition. So please welcome Professor El-Wakil to the podium.
Good evening. Thank you very much for coming. I'm very honored to be here. With my old age, I do not travel a lot, but I made it a point to come here because there is one of my great teachers is from your country, Ananda Kumaraswamy. Ananda Kumaraswamy has confirmed in me the value of traditional art and architecture, and also in memory of Geofffrey Bawa, whom I met in Cairo in '89 when I was getting the second award, Aga Khan Award. Before I met him, everybody in the Aga Khan committee would tell me, you are the Geofffrey Bawa of the Middle East. And then they made a book on his work, and they offered me a copy, and I fell in love with his work, this beautiful courtyard houses he did, and the sensitivity of the design, and the beautiful drawings that were produced in the book. I've never seen such beautiful drawings of architecture and the landscape and the trees. And this makes me very proud to be here among you. What is it that happens today in the aggressivity that we have today when we talk of traditional architecture? There is, there's no screen here, okay. There is a slide here I want to, first of all, there is the respect of culture. Architecture has a cultural aspect. In fact, architecture is the footprint of a culture. Literature can lie, poetry can praise, but architecture always reflects the true history of the culture. It leaves the footprint of that culture. And that there is something else in architecture also. When you talk of poetry or literature, it is transmitted through your conscious mind. Architecture is transmitted through your subconscious or unconscious. And that is why, if you realize what the forms do to you, which many people do not see it because they cannot read it consciously, they would reject much of what is happening today in architecture. Today they have, they call, especially in the Middle East now, we have this disaster of saying we want an iconic building. And this iconic building, I think, began in Australia with that horrible opera house. The architect drove everybody crazy. He couldn't build it, and they got of Arabs from England, and it cost 10 times as much, and the functionality of it, there was no backstage, there was... And when I went on a lecture tour in Australia and visited the opera, I was appalled. These buildings are not to be called architecture, because they are not made by architects. They are made by frustrated sculptors. It's an architect who wants to be a sculptor. And he does the building, as an external form. And the difference between sculpture and architecture is that sculpture displaces volume, but architecture is volume itself. So sculpture is not something you live inside, you see from the outside. And you have, I've been hearing a story about a woman architect who would take her scarf and throw it like this and give it somebody on the computer to do it. And the computer is a very dangerous tool because it uses NURBS, which is non-uniform, rational, Boolean splines. Anybody know what NURBS is or hear what I just said? And they are very complex mathematical equations that produces all those curves that you see on computers today, done by Zaha Hadid and Frank Gehry and all that. So, in fact, they are not made to be used by architects. I mean, when they did the TWA airport in New York, Eero Saarinen had to build several models because there was no computer work just to see the curves of the building, and the building failed because it couldn't be expanded, it couldn't be done anything, so they don't use it anymore. So architects who try to do buildings purely as sculpture, it's not what it is about. And other people who try to do traditional architecture, like myself, fall into another pitfall, which was best expressed by this man, Jaroslav Pelikan. And he said, tradition is the living faith of the dead. Traditionalism is the dead faith of the living, and it's traditionalism that gives tradition such a bad name. So, if you are doing true tradition, it's you are having in you the living faith of the people who died before you. So you see their way of building and everything, you understand what is behind the form, and you work in the same procedure with the new conditions. You will have variations on the form, but the spirit is the same. In traditionalism, it is the dead faith of the living. People do not understand why these forms have been made, but they make a parody out of it. A wind tower, they just do it now because as a decorative thing, it's not a wind tower anymore. They start using those forms fictitiously. So these are also the pitfalls of doing traditional architecture. But in order to understand how we came to this point, we have to look at the history of what we inherited from the past. Most of the third world is influenced by the high technology countries, Europe, America, and the publicity they get from Frank Lloyd Wright and Frank Lloyd Wrong and Mies van der Rohe and Mies van der Rohe and Corbusier and Courvoisier, and this is what we're taught at architecture, three great masters of modern architecture. And I usually ask my students sometimes, I tell them, you know, modern architecture, they say form, function, and structure. Okay, when we go to the isms, like tradition and traditionalism, who is the functionalist? Who is the formalist? And who is the structuralist? They usually get it wrong, but basically when you make an anatomy or a psychoanalysis of the modern architects, how they express themselves, you have Frank Lloyd Wright, he is the structuralist. Of course, many people will say he's the formalist. No, Frank Lloyd Wright is the structuralist. Why? Nature is structures. Nature structures. Everything in nature has a structure. The tree has branching, the flower has explosion, the sunflower has the geometry of Fibonacci theories. So Frank Lloyd Wright had his inferiority was structures. He wanted to prove himself as a structural engineer. So he did the first big cantilever. His client wouldn't accept it, so he built a wall. And when the client came, he got a cardboard and he passed it between the wall and the cantilever to show him that the cantilever was safe. He built the Johnson factory. He did the mushroom columns. He made a high-rise on one column. And then he did the Imperial Hotel in Tokyo, which withstood the earthquake. So Frank Lloyd Wright was fascinated with structures. And because of that, he went and lived in nature, because nature is structural by nature. And he started a book on organic architecture, and then he did the biggest mistake ever, is that he started to use his biological hexagonal patterns to do his buildings. And he didn't realize that the hexagon does not belong to man, it belongs to the cell and to the bees. Man is, and I'll show you later in the lecture, his shape is the cube. And that's why they say the right angle, it's 90 degrees. It's not 60 degrees as Frank Lloyd Wright did. So this is how the isms come about. Then you have Corbusier. He was the formalist. He always wanted to be a painter, and he always wanted to be a sculptor. So he tried to do his building with this sculptural effects. And what he did with Ronchamp, he took the hat of a nun, and he made the chapel. And in Chandigarh, he took a hand and blew it up. And this blowing up of things, he took the louvers of the beautiful wooden louvers that you have in India and in the Middle East, which are 1 centimeter by 3, and he blew it up to 10 centimeters by 30 and made it in concrete. He was a megalomaniac, and his disease is what they call fragmentation and obsession. He takes something and become obsessed with it and make it big. And then there is Mies van der Rohe. He was the functionalist. So you have now, we spoke of structure, form, and function. And his function was to go to the basic needs, and he was saying less is more. So in fact, because of that, and because of the simplistic attitude of functionality, he became the standard that produced all those ugly towers in our cities. In fact, the city will be destroyed by the high rise. And I'm glad that one thing Frank Lloyd Wright wrote a chapter on the tyranny of the skyscraper, and that it is one building that destroys city life. Now, when we look at these 3 slides, you have from the point before the modern, and now I give an idea of how the modern 3 grand masters of architecture influenced our schools. And these are the 3 masters that I was taught from 66 to 65 at my school. These 3 pictures show something. 3 cultures in Europe that have influenced us. The first one on the top is the beautiful Gothic. And then when there was, also there is other than Ananda Rama Kumaraswamy, who wrote a beautiful book, The Destruction of the Christian Tradition. Here, when they began destroying the Christian tradition and calling the Christian age of Europe as the Dark Ages, and that the Renaissance was the age of illumination and Renaissance, which it was not, of course, they did the churches like a Greek temple, as you see in the Magdalene. Magdalene in, that's what they call it, right, Juliette, in Paris, huh? The Magdalene, yeah. And then you have the third stage, which is the Corbusier effect, this modern cacophony that you see here. This, and in any age of experimentation, there is always a breakup of form. So usually in a society, there is the form, If the form is very strong, it becomes despotic. You know, you can't do this, you can't wear that, you can't do that. And there is a status, which is a function. And if you lose the function, like France, the royalty lost its function, the revolution happened. England, the royal family kept its function until today. Prince Charles is very active, the Queen, go to ceremonies, do. Because they are keeping their function, they survive. So there is always a balance in architecture between the form and function. If the form is too strong, then it becomes oppressive, and people want to free themselves of it. So at one moment, when there is a revolution, there is a breaking up of form. And this is what's happening today. All the architects are experimenting, like Frank Gehry. I'll show you, if we have time, a small video of Frank Gehry. And then you have also the elaboration. When a style begins, like in Arabic calligraphy, you have the beautiful Kufic style, and then at the end it became the Diwani, which was all in circles and everything like the dancing of the Danube and waltzing. The other was very warrior-like and strong. So you have also two pictures here, which, let me see if it's in here. Yeah, there it is. You see here the purity and simplicity of the early Christian Cistercian architecture, which is beautiful, amazing, and pure. And then here you have the theatrical Rococo church, which looks like something done by a chef in hotel for the cake for the feast. And then here, you have to understand also in art, which is something also which I hope most of you have read all the works of Ananda Coomaraswamy, because they are a lifetime education. I haven't left one note or one book on the work of this great man. Him and another one also, Titus Burkhardt. He has done a beautiful book called The Mirror of the Intellect, and another of my great teachers is René Guénon, Frenchman, who wrote a book, The Age of Quantity and the Sign of the Times, which he explained our age as being quantitative and not qualitative. And this kind of presentation was how you present Mecca and Medina. And you see in the, I don't have a pointer here, okay. You see on this side you have a carpet, and above the carpet there's a dome, and this is the burial of our blessed Prophet Muhammad. So this type of presentation, symbolic presentation, is when art was used as a map, as a language, like you have the map of the London Underground. It's not a true map, it's a design. It's not based on the geography of London, but it's a graphic design to explain your movement. And this is how art was established before, as a means of communication, not something that the artist is doing for his mood. And here you can see when you have the Persian miniatures and everything, you have the axonometric. But then it started becoming the perspective. And then you have, this is what you have in Europe, the art of the perspective. And it became a fashion. Everybody was crazy about perspective. And I was analyzing, until the Renaissance, there is no culture in the world that used perspective. They used it as a technique for things, you know, you'd have it maybe inside one of the burials in chambers or so on, just as a descriptive thing. But to have it as an artwork, nobody used perspective. And in all the Egyptian art and all traditional art, there was no perspective. So why all of a sudden was perspective a folly in the Renaissance? What made it so great? Could you guess? This is what art is. It is also a reflection, as I say, a footprint of the culture. Before the Renaissance, nobody imagined to do something that is false. What is false? It is presenting a three-dimensional object on a dimensional plane by illusion. So you had shade and shallow, which is chiaroscuro, and perspective, making it look as if it's real. And then you go to the Louvre and say, look at the Mona Lisa, her eyes are moving with you. You know, and people begin to make nonsense about this realism. So the analysis is why was this becoming so popular? Why was everybody doing perspective? And you have to understand that some critics of art, like Herbert Reed maybe, or somebody else would say, oh, because Dürer discovered the laws of perspective. But this is, they say, the mother of necessities. Invention is the mother of, necessity is the mother of invention, or whatever. It is not because they discovered the laws of perspective, because we have perspective in Roman times. We found them in some triumphal arches, but it wasn't the, how do you say, the fashion. You know, it wasn't something that people were interested in. The interest became in the Renaissance because something happened in the Renaissance. The Renaissance, when it dropped the medieval spirituality, they didn't follow universal principles, but they started making personal theories, and the opinionated society was created. Now, when everybody has an opinion, he'll tell you, from my point of view is immediately perspective. Because perspective is, you only see it from your point of view. You draw to the vanishing point, that's your point of view. And it doesn't do what tradition was, that it was not your point of view, but what the universal doctrine is expressed in the painting. And you have the best example is the Russian icon, where it was not improvised or created by the artist. No, it was dictated by the priesthood, and it was expressed with the dexterity and the craft of the artist. So this is another thing that, and in many of my presentations, I stopped using this perspective because I found it doesn't give you the, it is illusion. I mean, in tradition, the painting was to express some truth before people spoke or read, used to read, and literate people. So images was the form of transformation of knowledge, and now you have it in all the icons. I remember the old cars, you had fuel, and then if in Italy, olio, and benzina, and in French, you'd have it essence, every language, Japanese, so on. And then they started making items. Fuel, you have a pump. Oil, you have an oil can. So the iconic and hieroglyphic language started to come out in the modern times again, especially with the cell phone and all that. And here you have something I want to show you. This is how the sky was represented in traditional churches. Also in the temples of Egypt, you had the sky was blue, and they had golden stars. And the star was reflected on earth, and every man is considered to be a star, and that's why when you're at school, you're a good student, they put you a star on your grades and tell you very good. And if you are in the movies, you become a star because you are the very few that represents the whole of society in the illusionary world of film. So this is how the representations of the traditional church was from Egypt to the church. And then what happened here, this is when you have the disaster of Michelangelo, of the Renaissance, and you have this, all this, I don't know if it was an early pornographic type of painting, but he turned the Sistine Chapel from this beautiful sky, he turned it into all this flesh and sort of, and then this is the disaster. This is God with, I think, Adam. And then you can see Adam naked with his organs showing, and it's debasing the whole of culture, and they call it the Age of Illumination, my God. And of course, when I speak like this of Michelangelo, I might get one of the mafia hitmen to kill me in Italy. But this is the true art, true Christian art. And I'm explaining this because what has happened in the West is always happening in our part of the world 200 years later. We are all victims of that virus that has come from in the Renaissance. Although it has produced great geniuses and everything, every age has its good. But when you have an argument, you must always remember, it is better to have a good with some bad in it than to have a bad with some good in it. And that's the difference, because when they argue about cultures, also the Renaissance wasn't good, Islam was like this and so on. Yes, it is. But if you have a good with some bad in it, one flower that's bad and you take it out, like this one, sorry I spoiled your thing. But it's different to have a rotten apple with one part of it that's good. So this was how it was represented. And also it had what the modernists lost in architecture, which is when they speak of form, structure, and function. There are three others that I add to this: number, geometry, and symbolism. Sometimes when I talk of symbolism, people say I'm Masonic or, Freemason or whatever, because symbolism now is like in occult societies, magic and so on. But no, symbolism is when you have a form that becomes transparent. Instead of being a mirror reflecting your ego, it is transparent, and you see beyond the form to see the spirit of the form. And this is what happens here. You are not looking at the form. You're not looking at the Madonna with her breast coming out like they did in the Renaissance. He would paint his mistress with a baby Jesus suckling. No, they would show you sometimes, and there are pictures of Jesus as being the face of a man, and they said it's because they didn't know anatomy of Gray's Anatomy. But it was represented as a man, is that he spoke at birth, and he had a beard, and he had a crown, which he was a king. He was a divine figure. So you have these beautiful paintings of illustrating, like the icons. I don't have any of the icons, Russian icons, but they are beautiful, representing the Madonna and Jesus. And here you have now the Renaissance. Look at Jesus, a baby with his private parts showing, and there are worse pictures. But we won't go to Michelangelo again. But this is how the principles of art the symbolism, and the forms are deformed. And now to go and show you real deformation. Ta-da! There. The tower on the upper right, it was done by an architect who was doing a project in the Gulf. And he twisted the tower like he sees those women covered in all their black abayas with their backs coming out, and that's how he did it. Symbolism of a woman walking. Then you have this church, which looks like a ski slope. And then you have that building, the two stuck together. They called it Ginger and Fred Astaire because they're dancing. And then you have this ice cream cone that looks like a mosque. And this is when you have the experimentation of form, breaking up of form. And so you have the breaking up of form and the loss of status, the two things that must up architecture. And then here you have, I prayed to God that when they did this new building, I will not be the head of the Department of Architecture and Urban Planning. And it's funny, when the new building came, they made me redundant. This is the new building where I used to teach in Qatar Foundation. And again, the minarets are sloping, and the miracle symbol of verticality, they did it as slopes. And it looks like a mantra ray. And then you have this by Jean Nouvel. It's the new museum. It's like flying saucers that crashed into one site. These buildings are not made for us, they're for the aliens coming from outer space. And anyhow, this gives you an idea of what happens. And I want to show you now the first mosque I did, which also I got an award for, but I did nothing new in this mosque. What I did, I took the purity of symbolism of the mosque. The cube, the octagon, and the dome. And I made a repercussion of it in the minaret. And this 3 stages is amazing. In the Quran, in Surah Taha, God says, وَالسَّمَاء وَالْأَرْض وَمَا بَيْنَهُمَا. مَا فِي السَّمَاء وَمَا فِي الْأَرْض وَمَا بَيْنَهُمَا. What is in heaven, and what is on earth, and what is in between. Now, in symbolism, you have heaven, earth, and the world of forms, which is the Platonic forms, the archetypes. Platonic forms is different from the forms you're talking about. It is where things are written or formulated before they are manifested into the physical, into earth. And these are 3 worlds. And the transition between heaven, which the dome symbolizes, and the cube, which symbolizes earth, and this will come later why, and the octagon, even in Greek, they have the Tower of the Winds, it's an octagon, and it's usually where the opening is because that's where the wind comes from, and it's also the angels. And they say that the throne of heaven, of God, is carried by 8 angels. So there is a symbolism when I talk of number, geometry, and symbolism. It's all involved in this. And from that pure state of mosque based upon, and the dome never in the center, always gravitating towards Mecca above the mihrab, so that the light, you go towards Mecca and then you go towards heaven, the light coming down on the mihrab is here. Now they do the dome central, like the Orthodox Church of Greece. This is wrong. And then you see here in those 4 photographs, one dome looks like a skating stadium. They took away the octagon and they took away the cube. And some leave the octagon. And then you have this was done by the Mosque of King Faisal in Pakistan. It was done in France and it looks like an airport terminal. There is no symbolism. It's with this folded slab, and the other one looks like a tower for cellular phones and space thing. And this is very interesting historically, this picture, because you see the dome that looks like a turban on the right upper side. This was done by Marcel Breuer for the Iraqi University. And the generations later, you get the influence of this subversiveness in the mosque on the right, which was done by Basil Bayati in Iraq, which he did a dome on a pentagonal shape. The dome was never on a pentagonal shape. How did he get it into pentagonal shape? The dome is exactly like this hall. The maximum of people in the front seats, and row after row. So the rectangle goes like this. In the church, it goes like that. So you spread like this, and you have a wall, straight wall, which is the blind wall facing Mecca, where you have the prayer niche, and that's it. So where did the Pentagon come from? Washington, where did he get this shape from? So they become, personal opinion. They become the creative minds. They say, oh, it is the 5 pillars of Islam. It represents the 5 pillars of Islam. I mean, where was this in the history? Where did anybody of all the, before television and football, if I was a dictator, I'd ban football and golf, I tell you the truth. People didn't have this euphoria for football and things. They were all the day between the mosque and their houses. How come they didn't think like this Rasim Bayati or whatever his name is, who's on psychedelics? I don't know. There is the beauty of the simplicity of, this is in Cordoba. This one on the upper right is my favorite because it's called El-Wakil Mosque in Isfahan. And then the two below, one is done by Versace, and it's like boutique mosque in Abu Dhabi. And there you have here, look at this, he's putting flowers and golden capitals that are sagging down, and it's all looks like Sinbad, the sailor for movies, Hollywood. And look at this out-of-scale distortion of geometry with the flowers growing like around it like a garden. So what is this? Some sort of realism? What is the geometry that is... and by the way, those forms, they weren't just haphazard. You know that there's somebody who's been doing research on biogeometry in Egypt for 40 years, and he discovered how forms have an effect on people because they send waves exactly like sounds and like light and everything, and that certain forms affect you. And that is you go in a certain space, and the proportions and the and shape of the room and everything, this geometry starts to affect you and heal you. And all these patterns that were done, those patterns of octagons, hexagons, pentagons, dodecagons, and all that, they had a healing effect. And if you take a circle and you start putting those polygons in, If you put just one line, you have the half, the octave. If you put three, you have the third, you have the fifth, and you have the fourth, fifth, and you have all the musical notes of the octave by the way you divide the circle. And it's the same if you take the strings of a violin and you divide them in certain areas. For example, if you divide the string by 8 and 9, in music that's called the tone. That's the mathematical proportion of the tone. So this is all done haphazard, but here you have, I did this measured drawing of the floor of the Sultan Hassan Mosque, which is one of our most beautiful mosques. And here you have a geometry and scale like fractals from the very small 3 centimeter chipped marble up to the 30 meters. All it's not one pattern, regular and so on, but it's divided into nodes, and within the nodes, it's what today they call fractal geometry, where you have this zooming effect and this coagulation of forms to create new forms like the cells. And from these measured drawings, I started doing my floor patterns with them, and they're amazing. I mean, these are forms that send vibrations. And this is one of the most difficult. It took me 15 years to rediscover how these stalactites were made. And it was because one day Hassan Fathi lived near the Sultan Hassan, and when I was out of university with excellence and honors degree, and he wanted to break my ego so that he saves me from being an egomanic artist. And he passed by and he pointed at the Sultan Hassan and said, "You think you're an architect? When you are able to do this, call yourself an architect." And for 15 years, I'd go and come, look at it, photograph it. How did they do it? What's the geometry behind it? And then I got the opportunity when I was doing the King Saud Mosque in Jeddah. I said, I'm going to do it. And I started working in the office, and my manager was furious. He said, you know, with the time you're putting on this, you could have done a 600-bedroom hotel with the lounges, with everything, with tennis courts. Why are you wasting your time? Who's going to pay for it? Did the client ask it? I said, no. It's the only opportunity I have to do it. I want to crack it. And finally, we did it. Then we came to build it. Nobody could build it from the contractor. So I had to do it myself in England with some sculptors and in a workshop, and I used to go and we did it. And it was one of my most beautiful experiences, but it explained to me, you see how the circle is, and those two coagulating masculine and feminine, the two polarities that are transformed into the square, and this is half a dome. You see, it's amazing. It's one of the most beautiful entrances in Islamic architecture. That's the drawing we did of it. We didn't have computers at the time, so you imagine, because when you cut every shape, if you don't have it right, it will not join. It's like slicing, it's like designing sails. It's one part of it is exactly like the Sydney Opera House, the intersection of the, and this is the drawing. You can see how complex it is. In fact, when I wanted to fire somebody from my office, I never had the heart to do it. All I do is tell him, you're on stalactites now. You go and draw stalactites. After a month, he gives his resignation and goes to a psychiatrist. Now, in Islamic architecture, we have zina and zukhruf, ornament and decorum. We have a problem in Saudi Arabia because of the Wahhabi mentality, where any decoration or anything you do, or any ornament or anything is haram. You can't put anything. I had even one guy told me the hilal is haram. I said, why it's haram? He said, it's not Islamic. I said, what is it then? He said, it's Turkish. I said, and Turkey was not Islamic. It was the Ottoman Empire. But it's this phobia of having total simplicity. And when you have total simplicity and you create this void, it is never left as a void. It's filled with ugliness. So zina is always praised in the Quran. Zukhruf is not. And in a way, one of the best expressions to explain this is from Ananda Kumaraswamy. He said, an art that blusters the ego of man, that is modern art, and traditional art which nourishes the spirit of man. So this is the one haram, the one that blusters the ego of man, and that is zukhruf. And zina is the one that nourishes his spirit. And in the Quran, always zina refers to the good, zukhruf refers to man, to the arrogance of man or the money and so on. And there you see the beauty of these old traditional patterns. And these patterns send wave vibrations that heal. Because if you have music or sound, and you put it, I forgot the name of that they do this, you put it on a plate with sand, and you send the sand starts to take from the vibrations different shapes. And the shapes turn into geometry. So the opposite happens when you have these shapes, and the vibration of the send waves to you that are healing. Not only this, when I talk of numbers and geometry, here there's an article about a mosque shows amazing math discovery. And the Nobel Prize discovery of quasi-crystals was done by, guess who it was, of a scientist in Israel. And he gave the greatest praise to the art of Islam. Didn't come from a Muslim, came from a Jew in Israel, imagine. I mean, we should honor him. But he showed that the geometric patterns of the 13th century have the same pattern as quasi-crystals, which only were discovered 40 years ago. Nobody believed in them. This is a whole lecture by itself. But this is the quasi-crystals. Look at the geometry of them. There they are. Look at this, quasi-crystals. This is a five-fold 2D quasi-style spatial domain. This pattern is related to Penrose tiling. You can go to Penrose tiling and see that. So how did these forms come about? It didn't come for decoration. These people were healing. And what was the healing? They weren't healing your body. They were healing also your mind, your spirit, your soul. This is because we are not only, we have two parts in us. The Egyptians call it the ba and the ka, the soul and the physical body. And then the geometry, God gives his signature in everything he creates. There it is. The flower, it begins with the 3 red and 5 yellow. The beginning of the Fibonacci theories of the golden section. And everything in nature tends to the golden proportion. It's even the golden rectangle, I call it the rectangle of unity, because always when you divide it, there's one square, one square, one square. So it's like all the time saying, La ilaha illallah, God is one. And there you have the traditional art. I was supposed to do the Kiswa factory. They do the cloth to cover the Kaaba. And I had an incredible experience. Sometimes you read a book, you understand nothing of it. And it's like I was teaching a class in Miami, and I was teaching them how to build vaults and domes. And I don't believe in our modern education of just theory. It is for white-collar and blue-collar people that was developed during the Renaissance. But I believe in the traditional schools where you have, and Jean Piaget, who was one of the best people on pedagogy, he said the same thing, that people learn more by doing things, not by being told how to do it. So when I gave the class on vaults and everything, I asked the university, can you bring a contractor with bricks? I want the students to apply what they learned. When they came, all the vaults and arches collapsed. I told him, you see, you learned nothing from the lecture, from the theory. Now that you came and built it and it collapsed, I'll show you why it collapsed, and I built it in a way that it wouldn't collapse. So we had this problem when we were doing the Prince of Wales School of Architecture. The professors would talk, shall we give them workshops, shall we give them theory, shall we give it? No, it's integrated. I didn't learn from Hassan Fatih how to build a dome. I learned it from the mason. And I got up and I told him, I want you to teach me mason. He said, okay, but if you come up here, you take off your architect's hat. I said, what does that mean? He said, if you make a mistake, I'm going to hit you with the hammer on your knuckles, break them. I told him, Master Mason, why is your way of teaching so horrible? I mean, why you have to teach someone by knocking him with the hammer on the head or on the hands? Is this a way of teaching? He said, yes. I said, why? He said, because you see, in architectural school, when you make a mistake, you have a rubber. Here, if you make a mistake, both of us are dead under the dome. You get it? I said, I got it. Here, hit me. Anyhow, this beautiful, to come back to the story, I was supposed to design, when I was doing all the mosques, to design the new factory for the Kiswa of the Kaaba. So we went to one of the engineers, Egyptian guy, unfortunately, of Bin Laden, managing engineer. As soon as they went in, and he looked at the old machines. In fact, I was in Toronto in the museum, and I was looking at the textiles, the most beautiful Coptic textiles, Christian textiles of Egypt, and they were a remain of the pharaonic. And the curator, I knew her, and she said, Abdel Wahid, please, I want you to help me. I want to document the Kiswa factory in Saudi Arabia. I said, why? She said, they only have a loom that only exists in one town in India, in one village. It comes from pharaonic times, and it is in Mecca because they took it, Egypt was still doing the Kiswa of the Kaaba until recently, and when they got the craftsmen and everything, they took the machines with them. I want to document it because it's the first machine in history that is computerized. It works with a punch card. And this is a very interesting story because when I went in there and the Egyptian architect from Bin Laden said, oh, we're going to get rid of those old wooden machines and get you new aluminum ones. And I told him, you're crazy, you don't know the history of this machine and this, and explained to it the value of it. So the guy, Saudi guy running the factory, he looked up and said, God, you sent him, and he was crying. He said, everybody tells me to get rid of these machines. I'm a social worker. It's not my job. I'm here to preserve those machines. The art form that is done is from pharaonic times. And then I learned something that didn't go into my heart. You know, sometimes you say, I know, but then when it is in your heart, you say, I understand. And it came into my heart what Kumaraswamy said about the craft of the ego and the work, and that a true work of art is communal, and he wouldn't sign his name on it. And one thing Kumaraswamy refused to have is copyrights. He was against copyrights. He said, ideas don't belong to you, they belong to God. We are just transmitting them. And this beautiful man. And then I saw what they were doing. All of these people, the maimed, the crippled, one was doing the threading, the other was stretching the cloth, one was doing the cloth, the other was dyeing the weave, the other was doing the calligraphy, the other was doing the silver threads for the calligraphy. All these people would have been in a mental hospital or in an old man's or a house for the handicapped. They were all producing that masterpiece, and every year the procession will go, they put it in the Kaaba, and at the end of the year they take all the old cloth, cut it down, and spread it like in the Eucharist or like in Spain or so on, when they go out in the streets and bless the city with the Virgin Mary. And this was my last project, which we never did, unfortunately, when the Gulf War came and all the good projects were stopped. It was the curse, the Iraq War, the downfall of, it's been a downfall since then. But it's to show you how people are naive, and this guy was saying, oh, we'll get the new machines. And this was what Kumaraswamy is talking about. People working together who would have been useless people in the society. They have a function, and they produce a great work of art. And it's spread every year. It's given to every nation to hang in their buildings and so on, part of the Kaaba. We have one part of it now in Oxford Center, in Oxford Center of Islamic Studies in Oxford. And when I was working with the ministry, we used to get very stupid people coming in, and they are afflicted by being innovators. You know, the innovators, when Plato said he banned the artists from his republic because of unwarranted innovation. And one guy comes, and mostly they are Egyptians, unfortunately. One guy comes and says, why do we always have to do it in cloth? Why can't we make it in ceramic so that it lasts? He didn't see that the cloth and doing it every time was keeping, it's like the Izo temple in Japan. Every 20 years they demolish it and build it again to keep the craft going. So, one guy once wrote a letter to the ministry and saying, you know, I found all the mosques in Mecca, around Mecca, are wrong. I got the center of Mecca with a compass and so on, and I found that the Qibla wall, when you pray on this side of the mosque and the other, you're not facing Mecca. The wall has to be curved, because when you go into Mecca, the circle becomes bigger. Although the first mosque, I showed you the picture, it was always a rectangle. But he was, God gave him the inspiration to write to the ministry to say that they should have curved walls. So of course the minister threw the letter to me and said, I can't answer him. You're the only one who's going to be able to answer him. He's from your stock. I said yes, and I'm sure he had quite a few hash before writing this letter. So I wrote to him, I told him, you know, the ministry wants to give you a certificate of excellence because you triggered a whole sessions, and we investigated your observation, and we found it was amazing, and we even made further research, and we found also that not only the mosques around Mecca are not correct because the wall doesn't curve to meet as if we're doing missile projection of laser, I told him we also discovered that the mosques in America, because the earth is round, it's pointing towards the Sirius star. So we're going to try to go in America and tilt the floor of the mosque so that it is hitting the Kaaba. And this is the beauty of calligraphy, different styles. Look in a plate here, medallion. Nobody in the West produced calligraphy with that beauty. There you are, look at that. And there is something that you have to know about calligraphy. You 5 years to master the composition, and what it is to balance between the void and the solid. So in a way, what the Quran mentions about the mizan, that everything has to be balanced, in equilibrium, equilibration. It is in character, it is in everything. And that's how you train the craftsman. It is the work that makes the man. This is something I learned working with the crafts, which when I read before in books, it didn't go into my mind. It went my mind, it didn't go into my heart. This I designed and got it written by my teacher, the Sheikh of Khattatin, calligraphers in the Arab world, Muhammad Abdel, God bless his soul. He was beautiful. And look at that composition he has, so well balanced. But we have today again, I don't know what's wrong with the Egyptians. They have a curse of the pharaohs, maybe. I have an Egyptian friend who's become a very famous calligrapher. And he gave a lecture once and he said, I introduced color into calligraphy. I told him that's not true. He said, who said this? And I made my hand like, he said, I agree. And he continued. He wouldn't argue with me. He just said, I agree, and continued. Because he knew what I would show him, and this is it. That's I took as a fragmentation of a carpet. And doesn't it look like a modern artwork? Huh? Look at it. The calligraphy tilted. All the modern calligraphers now, all the painters of the Muslim world do paintings like this as innovation. There it is in an old 500-year carpet. And by the way, they don't, never a carpet that has sacred letters of the Quran are put on the floor, always on the wall. And here you have again, you have a geometric pattern, and this beautiful carpets, again, you can see of Bukhara and then this is a theme, I don't know if you see it properly, that I've been seeing all around in the mosques, in all Islamic traditional wall tiling. I always see this flower pot and the two trees. You see, I have three here showing different designs. But when you are investigating history properly, you say, why? Why is this being repeated all the time? Oh, I know why. Because they were stupid. They had lack of imagination. That's, if you are a modern egocentric, that's what you say. But if you are in respect of the mentality and the mindset of the traditional person, you say, why are they concerned by that theme? What is the symbolism in that theme? And this is what I'm talking about: number, geometry, and symbolism. Here the symbolism is the pot is where the seed is. And at the top of the tree is the flower. And what you are seeing here is that time is the distance between the seed and the flower. And the form that is evolving in time there, it is a space-time continuum. And this space-time continuum can only happen by opposites forces, which is the female masculine. And the Quran said before, in the 18th century, when they discovered that all plants are male and female, God said, we have created everything in pairs. So you want to study Einstein and space-time? They had it already in that beautiful painting. All you had to read the symbolism of the time. From the seed to the flower, and the cycle begins again. The seed is repeated. So you have this cyclic time of birth, death, renewal. Like in the pharaohs, you had birth, death, renewal. So it's not stupid art because they didn't have imagination. It's because they were confirming the message through the ages. And now here you have this egocentric artist of modern times, and the subversion of the West is promoting his art and selling it for millions at Sotheby's. You have this painting of the, what's his name? Oh my God, the French guy. He also did the urinal and made a sculpture out of it. Huh? Duchamp. Woman going down the stairs. And then here you have this calligrapher also doing the letters, da, 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 la, 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 la. And he offered to give me one as a present. I said, what will I do with it? What's this? Moses didn't stutter like that when he went to Pharaoh. Although he asked Aaron, his brother, to be with him, but Moses never stuttered like this, blah, 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 blah. And maybe I hurt his feelings, because after that he became a spaghetti chef. There his spaghetti is. That's what ended up our beautiful calligraphy that I showed you in tradition, became the kettle of... I saw on how they do it, The Secret, on YouTube, and they were showing a spaghetti factory, and it was coming down like this from the tanks. And now we come to the greatest pleasure of our new age, drugs, hash. This is a spider's web. And then the ones next by side, I had colored ones, but I put them quickly here to show you. When they give drugs to the spider, his web goes. And I have also photographed some buildings where I am sure the architect had some drugs or pills, hash, cocaine, whatever it is. But the beautiful grills that I showed you, they are twisted like that and so on. And I don't want to make scandals, but I tell you, I have some slides that would send the hitman on me. And now here we come to something very important when you talk of symbolism. And this is amazing. I'm writing a full paper on it now. But it's the cube of space and the three-dimensional cross. And if you look at all the religions, they surround these two forms. You have the cross, you have the Jews, they have the cube they put on the head or they put here, and they circle it 7 times around. It's the same as Mecca, the Kaaba, they have the cube there, and they circumcise it seven times. So there is a secret about 7, there's a secret about the cube, there's a secret about the cross. In fact, if you are working with AutoCAD, you are using the three-dimensional cross, X, Y, Z. Before Descartes, Al-Ghazali, but we don't know our history, so we say Descartes is the Cartesian geometry of X, Y, Z, but no, Ghazali put it before, but he put it in a way like those paintings you've seen where you cannot explain space-time unless you know the language. He said man has 6 directions, up, down, front, back, left, and right. And he said front, back is one direction, this is another, and this is another there. And I worked on this, and I found that also it had character. So the front back is a progressive axe. So you take 1 step forward, 2 backwards. So this is, up is qualitative, not progressive. This man is in the penthouse. This man is in the penthouse. You can't hear me? This man is in the penthouse. This man is in the gutters. So you have the qualitative axe. And left and right is quantitative. You come to a child, how much do you love your daddy? Like this. The British Empire, from east to west. The sun from east to west. Everything quantitative is like that. He has hordes of money. So the movement, the actions, and the words are expressions of the dimensions of space. It's the choreography. So when we had the vertical dimension, we looked up and could see God up in heaven. And Adam came down from heaven. And in fact, in Beirut, there is another sect of Muslims called the Ahbash. And they knew I did a lot of mosques, so they invited me to honor me to listen to a lesson they're giving. They call them lessons or classes. And the man was saying, كفر الذين قالوا إن الله في السماء إن الله بلا مكان. And that, for you who don't know Arabic, it says, kafirs are the sinners or whatever, are those who say that God is in heaven. God is not in any place. And after the lecture, he came, and these people, you can't argue with them. And he told me, what do you think of the lecture? Everybody was asking. I told him, well, you came into my field, into my playground. And he said, what do you mean? I said, I'm the man of place and space. And he said, what does that mean? I told him, who told you that God is, that the heaven is a place? Have you defined it? A place has to be defined by 3 dimensions at least, width, breadth, and height. Have you been able to define heavens? Why they can't say this? Because today all of them lost the symbolic language, which is the basis of all religious. The symbol, the sign, the token, the metaphor, all this is very important. So I found that these axes are very important. And when I started doing the mosque, I used to do the hilal, the crescent, looking up. All the municipality people, the ignoramus of our society, who think they can tell people how to design, tells you, why you have it up this? You have it like this. And you look at all the new mosques, the hilal looks like the crescent of the ambulance, like the Red Cross. So all the pharmacies now, they have this hilal instead of the cross. And I was saying, what is it that people tend to tear down what you're doing right and force you to do what is wrong? In all history, the hilal was up. What made it go 90 degrees? First, it went like that. I have a picture here, I'll show you. when I used to smoke Camel cigarettes, they had the Hilal at 45 degrees and Cecile DeMille in his film of Sindibad. But it wasn't existing in any of the old mosques. And then when I saw how these things took shape, and I said, my God, it's the footprint of our culture. Because when people had the vertical axis and they looked to heaven and they saw Adam coming from heaven, they have tilted now to the progressive axis, which is front back. So poor Darwin, when he looked back to see his ancestor Adam, he didn't see but an ape, a monkey. And he developed his theory of evolution. So this is how important the spaces are. Now, the three-dimensional cross is as a model of the structure of the universe. You have it here from the beginning in pharaonic times. This was the symbol of the city, the university city, where you have all the roads meeting at the center, and the center going upwards with this little nipple which looked like the breast. It was also the symbol of the sun, because the sun feeds us like the breast, it gives us life. So, but this isn't pharaonic. This I found in Saudi Arabia, it's Bedouin jewelry. So you can see the transformation. And the cross also was in many cultures. And you have here the cube, which is the opposite of the cross. But if you unfold the cube, you open it like that, what do you end up having? The cross. And if you take the top of the cube off, you have the Greek cross, Orthodox cross. So you have the three-dimensional cross, the axis, and the heart of it is very important. It's where it emanates from, the three centers. And if you cut this three-dimensional cross at 45 degrees, you'll get the Star of David. So the three forms, the cross, the Star of David, and the cube have been used in most religions, you see. And the circling at 7 is really also, I will explain now, it's the cube when it manifests itself from 1 to 2, it goes 1, 2 into the linear, 4 into the square, 8 into the cube. So it takes from one cube, it takes 7 cubes to complete the next stage, the next manifestation. So you have 1, 8, and then 64, earth. 8 is heaven. And the world in between is the cube of 9, 27. And we have 27 letters in the Arabic, plus the Hamza, that's 28, 27 letters in the Arabic calligraphy. And there is very interesting numerology about these cubes and everything. But basically, in Christianity, what they did at the three-dimensional cross, they had the heart, which they called the Sacré-Cœur, Sacred Heart. So my mother went to a French school called the Sacré-Cœur, Mère de Dieu, whatever they had. But the Sacred Heart is interesting to know that in ancient Egypt, the heart was called the bouncer, dancer, because of its rhythm. So this expansion and contraction, the sign of life at the center, at the heart, the Sacred Heart, and the cross producing. Now I did this in geometry, and I had Fahd, my friend Fahd Al-Atay's workshop, do me the model, which you'll see in the next picture. There's the first cube. Then you have the extensions. You half it, and you keep halving it, halving it, halving it. And this is taken from isometric, so at the end you end up having the hexagonal. And it goes on and on like that until 7 stages. Like you have the 7 heavens, you go 7 stages. But after that, the cube is that small, from a big cube of 64 centimeters. And you can see below the model how it looks. They are small, the pictures on that screen, but I hope you can see it. It's like, it's amazing. It's like this film, what's it called? Cyberborg or whatever. And then you have here, this is the computer model 3D, and I give each stage of the cube a color, 7 colors. But what you'll find interesting, if you look at the yellow ones, you see there's 1, 2, 3, 4, and 1 in the middle, 3 around it, and then you see 2 more, so each one is making a cross. You can see the crosses in yellow. And the pattern developed of these crosses end up here, which is the first cross is done in Ethiopia. And this is exactly, you see the cross here, and look back on the diagonal there, you'll see it. You see the yellow? It's going like that, like that. See 1, 2, 3, 4, and then 2. In the center, there's 2, 4 crosses, see? And if you take one out, you have 3 and a stand. And this is exactly what happened with the cross. So the cross was not really a symbol of the crucifixion, but it was a symbol of the structure of the universe. And here you have it again. You see that cross, the one on my side here on the right. If you look at it, it's a square with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 cubes, 8 squares. And then we'll come to this, we come again to the cube of 1 and 7 to complete the next cube of 2 by 2 by 2, 8. So you have from 1 to 8. It takes 7 cubes to complete the cycle. That is the secret of the number 7. When you go around the cube and you put it, you complete a cycle, you go into another manifestation, and this is part of the pilgrimage, is that you go from your cube into another expanded manifestation, the cube of 1 to the cube of 8, where you go into another extension, which is your spiritual volume. And there you have, there it is, you see? There, exactly the pattern I was doing. You have it in the Coptic cross there, and in this cross here, which is very different from the cross you have, which is supposed to be the crucifixion. And then you have the cross in Islam also. There it is. But people don't see it. But it's all, in all the mosques, you have this circle with the 4 corners creating the cross. And then I found this in some of the patterns, and I was fascinated by it. And I made the proportions of it, and I saw the amount of triangles, white and blue, and I found it was 51. I was wondering, what's 51, 51, 51? It turned to be the angle of the pyramid. So I took this and placed the pyramid on, and I found that the pyramid would fit exactly that pattern, and that is the pattern of the moon. So you have the earth and the moon here, and it would create the squaring of the circle, and all this geometry, which was not decoration, it was all part of putting some science into the building, recording it. And then you have the hilal again, which I spoke, and its symbolism. Also, you can see the origin of the hilal is the astrolabe. It is the golden section between the inner circle and the outer circle, which is the planets are all in relation to that proportion distances, golden ratios. And then you see all the old hilals here, and the one on my side here, the is one I designed for Kuba. You see, And they are all circular, or coming with little horns at the top, or whatever. There, and you have, there they are in the museum. Huh? But look at what's happening now. This you have here, I don't know if I can zoom here. Let's see. I don't know if you can zoom. No, you can't zoom. Anyhow, this is the Camel cigarettes. You can check it online. And you had the hilal, it was twisted like that. And then some again, unfortunately, Egyptian architect. I don't know what happened to my colleagues in Egypt, the curse of the pharaohs on them. There you have, it looks like it came from outer space, from the first Sputnik the Russians sent, and they Islamicized it by putting this, again, it's the twisted hilal. Look at that mosque, the circle capsule. Shame, shame, spit on them. Anyhow, this is showing here how I try to express the way of building in bricks and the beauty of having it flexible and creating shapes that are pleasing, and a variety of expression, because not everybody wants to have the same shape. So you have this mosque. I did one first. I worked with the municipality and got the students of university to build with me. This is another one. This is another one that gave me the Aga Khan for, which doesn't make me any proud. And this is a Turkish expression of it. And this is the domes, how you express the layering of the bricks, they change. And each dome has a variety. This is another way of doing the dome with the corners. So it's not boring. It's not that, oh, let's do something new. I could stay another 20 years. I've done 20 mosques and I didn't do anything yet. I was just beginning and everything stopped. But I can stay 20 years just doing different variety of patterns, just how a dome meets the square. This is another done in the old village of Jeddah, in the old town of Jeddah, with the architecture of Jeddah. This is done King Saud Mosque, which they wanted it in a style of the old mosque, which was done very badly, but I took it and we demolished the old mosque because it was done in concrete and it collapsed. And I did here the biggest dome ever I made, which was 20 meters in span. The biggest dome in the world is in India. It's 40 meters, but I don't think I'll have the chance to do another big dome like this. And then how the dome cuts into there's many ways to do it, into the rectangle, and here it's like a diamond cutting. So you never get bored. People think that, oh, if you do tradition, there's nothing new. Nonsense. There is not only new, there is challenge, there is intelligence, there is mastery of geometry, mastery of the craft. Everything is perfecting your character through work. There's the whole mosque built in bricks. They couldn't believe it. Look at the surrounding around it. And then here is the mosque built without any shuttering. They said, how will the bricks hold? And there they are, they're just circling, and there is a guide in wood just to keep the workers respecting the circle. And there's the interior of it, amazing. And each one of them is different. I mean, I can show you, but it will take hours, and people always complain that I go beyond the 50 minutes. And this is the Miqat al-Hulayfa also. And the minaret came out of accident because I didn't do a minaret there because it's outside. I just kept the low ones. And then they said, oh, how the king will come and see no minaret. So I had to build it from the ground. And I did this. And they said, oh, it's an innovation. It came out of accident. I had to start from the bottom, so I had to make it thick. And then by making a spiral and changing traditional architecture. And we did it, and took the spirit of the Oxford, which has a lot of Islamic spirit. Even the dome doesn't look like the other domes, and the minaret, I have 5 finials like the towers of Oxford. And I also used Victorian structures. This is a famous Victorian truss. We did it in cast iron, which was, and you know, we did it in 2 colors and with gold. And it's a beautiful for the auditorium to have this Victorian. But the mosque we did also inside the brickwork, and it was the first brick dome that has been done in England, maybe since, maybe, I don't know, maybe 100 years. And this is some pictures of it. We also do the mihrab, we do also, we still have craftsmen in Turkey and in Isfahan who can do this, carve them by, I got one guy from Turkey and he just looked at the plan and he carved it all. But you give it to hundreds of architects, they wouldn't know how to do it. And they treat this craftsman like they are superior to him. They don't respect the crafts. Every craft, you know, they used to tell me, why do the craftsmen always get the best work with you and they give us very bad work? I said, because you architects are arrogant, you don't respect them. So they won't give you their best. But I go, I sit with them, I have tea with them, I take them to the coffee shop at night, have dinner with them. And for them, the architect, to treat them like this, they want to give him his best. It's because they feel always they are treated as inferiors. And you have also other from all these domes, you have also the character. I did the golf clubhouse in Turkey. There it is. Is this El-Wakil with dome style and everything? Here I'm speaking Turkish dialect. Not so? That's Turkish architecture. So, and this is the disaster of the courtyard and the pavilion. This is disaster of our cities. There are the towers that are damaging our cities, and this is the courtyard design that was in all the traditional cities. There you have, look at this. This is the example, you can't see it here, but it explains how towers with 8 stories can be fitted in half the height nearly. When you do the courtyard design, you get rid of this municipality setbacks. And here you can see the effect there of the courtyard cities in Italy. And then here you can see when this was lost and you have no man's land here in New York with the T-towers and whatever, cross towers instead of the courtyards. And this is a last word that I have here, basically by Hassan Fathi. It is hoped that architects will come to realize the intrinsic nature of their architectural heritage. In doing so, they will reap the rich rewards of the accumulated experience that we left to them by their ancestors and will produce enduring works of art. When the full power of human imagination is backed by the weight of a living tradition, the resulting work of art is much greater than any that an artist can achieve when he has no tradition in which to work or when he willfully abandons his tradition. This is true from my experience. And this is Karim Laham, my nephew. He wrote a book, and I took this quote from him. It is our contentation that every thinker and writer is an inheritor of a chain of ideas, of an intellectual system that he necessarily manifests in his writings, consciously or unconsciously. There is no such thing as an orphan idea or an idea without a conceptual genealogy. This means that the nobility of soundness of any idea is narrowly dependent on the pedigree of its genealogy or silsila. And this is the man I would like you to meet in Oxford, Mr. Roy. This is And thank you very much for being patient.
Thank you very much, Professor El-Wakil. Very interesting. We roamed far and wide from the spirit, the mystical, mystics of numbers, but maybe not so mystical, and through very broad spiritual spaces, both physical and manifest. So thank you so much for spending some time with us, sharing. We have coffee and tea outside for those who want to speak further. But one more time, thanks. Thank you, Professor El-Wakil.